Good morning, everyone. Today we stand at a fascinating crossroads of global diplomacy and economic strategy, where the language of friendship meets the hard numbers of trade. The recent comments from former U.S. President Donald Trump regarding his intention to speak with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi offer a perfect window into this complex dynamic. He calls PM Modi a very good friend and expresses unwavering optimism about resolving a fierce trade dispute. Yet, simultaneously, he is actively lobbying European allies to punish India for its strategic energy purchases. This contradiction is not merely political posturing, it is the very essence of modern geopolitics. Over the next few minutes, we will delve into the nuances of this situation, unpacking the layers of this critical relationship between the world's oldest and largest democracies. We will explore the trade war itself, the central role of Russian oil, the weaponization of tariffs, the delicate art of diplomatic messaging, and what the future might hold for these two great nations. The opening act of this diplomatic play is one of public optimism and reaffirmed friendship. Donald Trump's social media announcement serves as a classic tool of U.S.-India trade negotiations' modern statecraft. A direct message to the world designed to project control and confidence by stating that negotiations are continuing and that he anticipates no difficulty in coming to a successful conclusion. Trump is attempting to set a positive tone. This language is strategically important for several reasons. First, it assures markets and businesses in both countries that a resolution is the intended goal, potentially calming economic anxieties. Second, it provides a political cushion for both leaders. By publicly framing the relationship as a friendship between two great countries, he creates a narrative that any eventual agreement is a win, a testament to strong leadership rather than concession of defeat by either side. This rhetoric of camaraderie is crucial in diplomacy, especially between nations with deep people-to-people ties like the U.S. and India. It separates the governmental dispute from the overall strategic partnership, suggesting that even serious economic disagreements can be managed within a framework of mutual respect. However, this optimistic facade must be taken with a grain of salt. It often serves as a smoke screen for much. The announcement of a call in the coming weeks is as much a signal to the Indian negotiating team as it is to the public, indicating that the U.S. is ready to talk but likely expects significant movement from New Delhi before the conversation even begins. It establishes a timeline and creates an expectation of progress, turning the upcoming dialogue into a soft deadline for a breakthrough. The genuine complexity of the U.S.-India trade relationship forms the bedrock upon which this optimistic rhetoric is built. For years, the economic partnership has been a story of immense potential hampered by persistent irritants. U.S. officials have consistently expressed frustration with what they perceive as market access barriers, high Indian tariffs on American products like agricultural goods and electronics, and complex non-tariff barriers related to standards and certifications. From the Indian perspective, the issues revolve around protecting its developing economy, its vast agricultural sector, and its own domestic industries from being overwhelmed by American giants. The trade deficit, often a focal point for Trump's America First policy, added fuel to the fire. The previous Trump administration initiated talks to address these imbalances, but progress was slow and often interrupted by unilateral actions, such as the removal of India from the Generalized System of Preferences (GSP) status in 2019, which had allowed billions of dollars of Indian exports to enter the U.S. duty-free. Therefore, Trump's recent cheerful pronouncements exist in the shadow of this fraud history. They are an attempt to reset the conversation after a period of escalated tension, specifically the recent doubling of tariffs. The positivity is a necessary first step to get both sides back to the table, but it does not erase the fundamental disagreements that have persisted for years. The success of the coming week's conversation hinges entirely on whether this public optimism can be translated Russian oil purchase issue into private compromises on these long-standing structural trade issues. If the first topic is the smile, the second is the stern frown. The central complicating factor in this entire negotiation is India's steadfast refusal to stop buying Russian oil. Following the invasion of Ukraine, Western nations imposed severe sanctions on Russian energy exports in an attempt to President Vladimir Putin's war machine. India, however, made a pragmatic and economically rational decision. It became the largest buyer of heavily discounted Russian seaborne crude. This decision was not an endorsement of the invasion, but a strategic move by the world's third largest oil consumer to control its massive import bill and curb domestic inflation. For the Indian government, securing affordable energy for its 4 billion citizens is a non-negotiable sovereign right and a critical economic imperative. From Washington's perspective, however, this is seen as undermining the collective Western effort to pressure Russia. Trump's threat to pressure the EU to join in imposing sweeping new tariffs on India and China, specifically to punish them for buying Russian oil, marks a significant escalation. It frames the trade dispute not just as a bilateral economic issue, but as a matter of global security and allegiance. This move fundamentally changes the nature of the negotiations for India. It is no longer just about finding a compromise on tariffs for apples or motorcycles. It is about being forced to choose between its economic interests and its strategic autonomy under the threat of collective Western economic punishment. This puts New Delhi in a difficult position. Abandoning cheap Russian oil would have severe domestic economic consequences and would be seen as capitulating to external pressure. A politically toxic outcome for any Indian government. Therefore, any conversation between Trump and Modi will be dominated by this issue. Trump will demand a reduction in Russian oil imports, while Modi will vehemently defend India's right to secure energy from wherever it sees fit. Finding a middle ground here is nearly impossible, making it the single biggest obstacle to the successful conclusion. Trump has predicted the oil issue also highlights the divergent worldviews and priorities of the two nations. The United States, as a global superpower and architect of the post-international order, often seeks to enforce global norms through economic and military means. Its policy towards Russia is ideological and strategic, aimed at preserving a specific vision of global security. India's foreign policy, on the other hand, has historically been rooted in strategic autonomy and non-alignment. Its primary focus is on its own development and economic growth. While it has condemned the loss of life in Ukraine, it has carefully avoided directly condemning Russia, a historic ally and a key supplier of military hardware. This difference in approach creates a fundamental clash. The U.S. sees India's oil purchases as funding Putin's war. India sees its actions as essential for its own economic stability and development, arguing that it simply cannot afford to buy more expensive oil from other sources. Impact of tariffs and trade barriers. Furthermore, Indian officials have pointed out that European nations themselves continue to purchase Russian energy long after the invasion began, albeit while working to reduce their dependence. This perceived hypocrisy adds a layer of resentment to the pressure from the West. For any negotiation to succeed, the U.S. must understand that a blunt demand for India to stop buying Russian oil is a non-starter. A more plausible discussion might revolve around potential caps or gradual reductions, perhaps tied to the global oil price or progress in ceasefire talks. But even this would be a tough sell for Modi. The Russian oil dilemma is thus not just a policy disagreement. It is a collision of national interests, historical relationships, and differing conceptions of a country's role in the world. The primary instrument being used in this high-stakes game is the tariff. A tariff is essentially a tax on imports, and Trump has wielded this tool more aggressively than any modern U.S. president. His administration's decision to double the tariff rate on many Indian goods to 50% is a massive economic blow. This isn't a minor adjustment. It's a punitive measure designed to inflict enough economic pain on Indian exporters to force the government in New Delhi to change its behavior on Russian oil and lower its own trade barriers. This action shocked Indian officials because it represented a drastic escalation from the already high 25% rate, revealing the depth of Trump's frustration. For India, these tariffs directly impact key export sectors, threatening jobs and industries. The U.S. is one of India's largest trading partners, and such a high barrier makes Indian products like textiles, engineering goods, and chemicals significantly less competitive in the American market. The threat to mirror any tariffs imposed by the European Union creates a scenario of a coordinated Western trade wall against India, which would be devastating for its export-oriented economy. This use of tariffs as a weapon of punishment rather than just a tool for balancing trade marks a new and more confrontational chapter in trade diplomacy. It moves away from the slow negotiated process of resolving disputes through bodies like the World Trade Organization (WTO) and towards a might-makes-right approach where larger economies can unilaterally pressure smaller ones. India's response has been to assail the hikes and insist on its right to continue its energy purchases. But it is also left with difficult choices. Retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods would hurt American farmers and manufacturers, but could also hurt Indian consumers and damage the broader relationship further. The tariff war creates a lose-lose situation in the short term, with both nations' economies suffering in the hope of achieving a long-term strategic win. The upcoming call between the leaders will be a critical moment to decide whether to de-escalate this tariff war or let it spiral further. The reliance on tariffs also exposes the limitations of this confrontational approach. While designed to force compliance, extreme tariffs can often backfire. They disrupt well-established supply chains, increase costs for domestic diplomatic relations and future prospects manufacturers who rely on imported components, and ultimately lead to higher prices for consumers in the country imposing the tariff. For the U.S., higher cost on Indian goods could contribute to inflation, a sensitive issue for the American electorate. Furthermore, it pushes the targeted country to seek alternative markets and suppliers, potentially reducing its long-term economic dependence on the U.S., an outcome that would run counter to American strategic interests in the Indo-Pacific region. For India, the high U.S. tariffs are a stark reminder of the vulnerability that comes with reliance on a single powerful market. It could accelerate India's efforts to diversify its exports and strengthen trade ties with other regions like the Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia through agreements like the one with the European Free Trade Association (EFTA). This weaponization of trade policy therefore carries significant long-term strategic risks for the United States. It could push India, a crucial partner in countering Chinese influence in Asia, closer to economic blocs that are less aligned with U.S. interests. The conversation between Trump and Modi will need to address not only the removal of these punitive tariffs, but also the establishment of a more stable and predictable trade framework to prevent such damaging escalations in the future. The goal should be to move from a relationship based on the threat of punishment to one based on the mutual benefits of cooperation. The fourth layer of this situation is the fascinating dissonance between the public language of friendship and the private actions of pressure. Trump is a master of this dual-track approach. By consistently referring to Modi as his very good friend, he personalizes the relationship, creating a buffer against total diplomatic breakdown. This personal connection allows him to make harsh criticisms or take aggressive actions while maintaining a channel for dialogue. His comment that he would always be friends with Modi, even if he didn't like what he's doing at this particular moment, is a textbook example of this strategy. It separates the person from the policy, allowing for criticism without a complete personal rupture. For Modi, navigating this is a delicate act. He must respond to severe economic pressure and what can be perceived as public humiliation from a strategic partner, all while acknowledging the importance of the U.S. relationship and the personal dynamic with a former and potentially future president. India's response has been to stand firm on its core interests, all like buying Russian oil, while keeping the door open for discussions on other trade issues. This requires immense diplomatic skill. India cannot be seen to buckle under U.S. pressure, as that would damage its credibility and its stance of strategic autonomy. Yet it also cannot afford a full-blown trade war with the U.S. The special relationship that Trump mentions is real. It encompasses deep security ties, a large Indian diaspora in the U.S., and shared concerns about China, but it is being severely tested. This public-private dichotomy is a crucial part of the negotiation dance. The public smiles and handshakes maintain the overall conclusion and key takeaways framework of the partnership, while the real tough bargaining happens behind closed doors. The success of the upcoming call will depend on their ability to compartmentalize these issues, to have a frank and likely difficult conversation about oil and tariffs privately, while emerging to publicly reaffirm the strength of the U.S.-India partnership. This balancing act extends beyond the two leaders to the entire diplomatic apparatus. U.S. officials must convey their firm stance to their Indian counterparts without causing irreversible damage to the partnership. Indian diplomats must articulate their country's sovereign rights without appearing defiant or unwilling to engage on legitimate trade concerns. The moments on occasion that Trump references are inevitable in any complex relationship between two major powers with different national priorities. The key is to manage these moments so that they remain just that moments and not a permanent new state of hostility. The machinery of diplomacy, including trade negotiators, foreign ministry officials, and ambassadors, works constantly to find common ground and draft potential compromises that leaders can then approve. The upcoming Trump-Modi call is not the negotiation itself. It is the high-level political push that can provide direction and momentum to these technical teams. The leaders will set the tone and the broad parameters. For example, find a way to reduce the trade deficit or explore solutions on energy that address our concerns, and then leave the details to their staff. The language of friendship is the grease that keeps this complex machinery from seizing up under pressure. It allows both sides to retreat from hardened positions without losing face, framing compromises as victories for a cherished partnership rather than concessions to an adversary. So what can we expect from the coming weeks? The path to a resolution is narrow and fraught with challenges. Trump has hinted that India offered to cut its tariffs on U.S. goods to zero, but he deemed it too late. This suggests that the baseline for U.S. demands is extraordinarily high, nothing less than complete market access paired with a drastic reduction in Russian oil imports for India. This is likely an unacceptable starting point. A more realistic negotiation will involve painful concessions from both sides. India may offer significant reductions on tariffs for specific American products like agricultural goods, egg, almonds, apples, and high-tech equipment. In return, it will demand the reinstatement of its GSP status and the removal of the punitive 50% tariffs on its own exports. The intractable issue remains Russian oil. Here, a creative solution is needed. Perhaps a deal could involve India agreeing to not increase its purchases from Russia beyond a certain cap, rather than cutting them outright. The U.S. might also offer guarantees of stable energy supplies or financial incentives to help India diversify its sources. Ultimately, both leaders must weigh their immediate trade against the long-term strategic imperative of their partnership. The United States needs India as a stable democratic counterweight to China and Asia. Alienating India with perpetual trade wars pushes it closer to the very Russo-Chinese partnership that Trump criticizes. India needs American technology, investment, and security cooperation to fuel its own growth and maintain a balance of power in its region. This strategic reality is the most compelling reason for both sides to find a compromise. The successful conclusion Trump envisions will not be a total victory for either side, but a messy face-saving compromise that allows both countries to claim a win, de-escalate the immediate economic conflict, and preserve the vital strategic partnership for the challenges of the future. The outcome of these negotiations will also set a crucial precedent for global trade in an era of renewed great power competition. Will economic relationships be dictated solely by punitive tariffs and coercive diplomacy? Or can democracies find a way to manage their disagreements through mutual respect and negotiated compromise? A failure to reach a deal would signal a further fragmentation of the global economic order into blocs with countries forced to choose sides. A successful, though likely imperfect, agreement would demonstrate that even amid serious geopolitical disagreements like the war in Ukraine, major powers can still find ways to cooperate on mutual economic benefit. The eyes of the world, particularly other mid-sized powers navigating the tensions between the U.S., China, and Russia, will be on this dialogue. The conversation between Trump and Modi is therefore more than a bilateral trade discussion. It is a test case for the future of international diplomacy itself. The pressure is on both leaders to look beyond the immediate headlines and tariffs, and to make decisions that secure not just short-term economic gains, but long-term peace and stability for both their people and the wider world. In conclusion, the upcoming dialogue between the U.S. and India is far more than a simple trade talk. It is a multi-layered drama encompassing economic pressure, geopolitical strategy, personal diplomacy, and the sheer weight of history. The cheerful optimism of good friends is real, but it exists alongside the very real threat of punitive tariffs and global isolation. The core issues, market access, the Russian oil dilemma, and the use of tariffs as a weapon, present formidable challenges. A resolution will require immense political will, strategic foresight, and a willingness to compromise from both Washington and New Delhi. Ultimately, this moment will define the character of the U.S.-India partnership for years to come. Will it be a relationship tested by fire and strengthened through resolving difficult disagreements? Or will it be weakened by mutual intrigence and a failure to reconcile differing national interests? The world is watching, waiting to see if these two great democracies can navigate their complex dance and find a rhythm that benefits not only themselves but the stability of the entire international order. Thank you.